On September 12, 1962, at Rice University, President John F. Kennedy uttered the famous line, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." I have always liked that speech, maybe because Kennedy was himself a surface warrior, or maybe because he spoke English with the proper accent. But just before he delivered the routinely cited "we choose to go to the moon" line, President Kennedy said the following about space. "There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all of mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas?" While Kennedy was visualizing the endless expanses of space and the possibilities that nations may compete to control it, he may as well have been describing the sea itself. So now, 67 years later, we might ask, why must we continue to go to the sea? Why do we forward deploy and patrol vigilantly? Why do we relentlessly uphold the sanctity of the freedom of the seas? Why does Army play Navy? We choose to go to the sea because we are a maritime nation. We choose to go to the sea to defend our national interests. We choose to go to the sea to safeguard the rights of mariners and the freedoms of other seagoing nations. We choose to control the seas because if we don't, somebody else will. We've known this since the earliest days of the American Revolution. Lest we not forget it now, the Surface Force will not forget. We have been, we are, and we will be the premier surface force in the world, second to none, that controls the sea and provides combat naval power when and where needed. We are part of a proud legacy of greatness with heroic examples of what it takes to win at sea. So let's talk about what winning at sea looks like. Let's talk about combat-ready ships and battle-minded crews. Ernie Evans was the commanding officer of USS Johnston, DD 557. On March 25th, 1943, the day that Johnston's commissioning, he announced to the crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go into harm's way, and anybody who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." No one got off. Fast forward to October 24th, 1944. As we were conducting the landings at Leyte Gulf, Admiral Bull Halsey's Third Fleet had just destroyed the Japanese Southern Force coming through the Surigao Strait and had severely damaged their Central Force coming through the San Bernardino Strait. But then he got diverted up north, chasing a decoy Japanese carrier battle group, and left the landing force in Taffy 3, 6 jeep carriers with just a few destroyers and destroyer escorts, unguarded. Unfortunately, the Japanese Central Force had turned around during the middle of the night to re-engage. At 7 o'clock in the morning, on board Johnston, the officer of the deck could see water columns spraying over the decks of the carrier escorts. He immediately set general quarters. The Mount 55 gun captain thought to himself, why the hell is Halsey shooting at us? But then they saw the pagoda masts on the horizon, 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Ernie Evans emerged from his at-sea cabin, and not waiting for orders, he commenced a hard left turn at 36 knots and charged directly toward the enemy. He called down to his engineers to make smoke, and he placed Johnston between the Japanese and the carriers. He ordered the gunnery officer, Lieutenant Bob Hagan, to ready all guns and fire when in range of the Japanese heavy cruiser Kumano. Hundreds of 5-inch rounds were fired, and Bob Hagan landed some 40 hits on the Kumano's pilot house, setting it ablaze. As the range between the Japanese and Johnston closed, Evans ordered his torpedo officer, Lieutenant Welsh, to ready all torpedoes. And at 10,000 yards, Johnston let loose. When the smoke cleared, they could see the bow of the Kumano had been blown off, crippling the Japanese cruiser. She was out of the fight. A 2,100-ton Fletcher-class destroyer firing 5-inch rounds and torpedoes at 5 miles took out a 13,500-ton Japanese cruiser firing 8-inch rounds. After turning back into her own smokescreen, Johnston took her first hits from the 26,000-ton Japanese battleship Congo, losing her port shaft and now limited to a max speed of 17 knots. The next battery came from the largest battleship, the 72,000-ton Yamato, launching continuous 6-inch rounds. The blast to the port bridge wing tore the shirt off of Ernie Evans and ripped 2 fingers from his left hand. Shrapnel lodged in his face, neck, hand, and torso. And when the ship's doctor came to dress his wound, he ordered, "Don't bother me now. Help some of those guys who are hurt." Bob Hagen got on the sound-powered phones for a status update on his guns. All but Mount 54 rogered up. It was getting neither electrical power nor signals from the fire control system. BM-1 Hollenbaugh, the Mount captain, sent a messenger up to request from Bob Hagen permission to put his gun in local control. Bob approved the request, and BM-1 began his own personal war against the Japanese, hand-cranking his gun with his magazine crew hand-loading the ammunition. At this point, Johnston had given everything anyone would ever expect from a ship and a crew. Yet Evans again turned his small destroyer into the fight and crossed the T of the Japanese destroyer column, so severely damaging the first destroyer that it had to turn away, and then again so severely damaging the second destroyer, it too turned away. But at 0940, after the 2.5-hour fight, the shell that sealed Johnston's fate hit the forward boiler room and stopped the starboard screw. Johnston was dead in the water. The abandoned ship's calls were made, and as the crew made their way over the side, Evans was last seen on the fantail shutting orders down the hatch into aft steering. He went down with his ship. Ernie Evans was the only person awarded the Medal of Honor for the actions at Battle of Leyte Gulf because of his leadership and his toughness and the actions of Johnston and her crew. But that was not the first time that Johnston was honored. As Johnston was sinking, the crew in the water watched as the Japanese destroyer Yukikaze sailed directly for them. Many thought the Japanese were closing in for the kill. But as it slowed and started to pass, they saw that the Japanese crew was standing at attention and the captain was saluting on the starboard bridge wing. Ernie Evans was a fighting captain who had prepared his ship and his crew for the fight, and they owned the fight that day. That is our legacy. We are the world's premier surface force, second to none, that controls the seas and provides the nation with combat naval power when and where needed. We are, and we will remain the best. We will talk, we will look, and we will act like the elite professionals we are. This word cloud highlights the key messages and the initiatives ongoing in surface warfare. We're doing a lot of awesome stuff, and we're getting better every day. These words directly capture the essence of what we are all about. It's all about readiness to fight. We are once again in great power competition, and that competition requires us to operate forward, control the seas, and always be ready. To do that, we must own tomorrow's fight today. The initiatives and the policies in place are not an end unto themselves. They are in place to generate combat-ready ships and battle-minded crews. When conflict comes, we'll go into the fight with what we have. That's all we can do. But we will ensure our crews are fully trained, fully certified, and our ships are battle-ready. The imposing silhouette of a warship off any coast tells friend and foe, we are committed and ready. The Surface Force provides this value on par or better than any other community or any other part of the Joint Force. There is a reason why we have warships patrolling on either side of the Strait of Hormuz or sailing through the Taiwan Strait. We are the most visible sign of American determination to protect the peace, advance our interests, and support our partners and our allies. Our presence in contested areas of the ocean must be coupled, though, with credible combat effectiveness. As peer competitors advanced in capability, we must take action to remain a step ahead. We cannot go backward. We must identify our future warfighting needs and take action with urgency to deliver them when needed. And as new capabilities and technologies reach the fleet, we will now have a command ready to conduct the experimentation needed to rapidly learn how to maximize lethality. So last year I talked about the Surface Development Squadron and what it would bring to the fleet. Well, in May of 2019, Surface Development Squadron 1 established, dedicated to the rapid development of manned and unmanned capabilities. Some of you probably saw the reporting in the first week of January on Admiral Grady's order for SURF-4 to develop the concepts of operation for the unmanned surface fleet. SURF-DEVRON is already doing that work. To ensure we remain the premier surface force, we are investing today for tomorrow's fight. Flight 3 DDGs, FFGX, a full inventory of SM-6, Spy-6, Maritime Strike Tomahawk, integrated combat systems, large and medium unmanned surface vessels. And we are literally putting frickin' lasers on ships. SURF-DEVRON's charge is to figure out how best to employ these new systems and these new capabilities. But make no mistake, we are already moving out on increased lethality as fast as possible. For example, USS America LHA-6 completed her Comp 2X last year with 13 embarked F-35 aircraft, and she can carry more than that. You know, I don't think those 13 aircraft are just there for the defense of the amphibious task force. A big deck with that many F-35s is beginning to look a lot like an aircraft carrier to me. And any other country would call it an aircraft carrier, and it's part of the Surface Force. The Surface Force is already moving out on Secretary Modly's, Admiral Gilday's, and General Berger's direction for the Navy and the Marine Corps to stop cooperating, stop interoperating, stop coordinating, and start integrating. So, as we look to the year ahead, we have three major lines of effort. First, the current readiness of the force will always be our collective #1 priority. Combat-ready ships and battle-minded crews are the products the Surface Force provides to the numbered fleet commander. Second, the enhancement of mariner and warfighting skills, emphasizing professionalism, will continue. With the help of Congress and Navy leadership, the Surface Force made substantial and lasting mariner skill investments over the last couple of years. While we are not declaring mission complete, the pace of the enhancements, coupled with their initial results, are cause for optimism. We've committed $3.8 billion to individual, watch team, and strike group training. The enhancements to our bridge and CIC simulators make them top of the line, and more improved trainers are still yet to come. And we are matching this exceptional training with the state-of-the-art training facilities, the Maritime Skills Training Centers. Complementing the ashore training is world-class training conducted at sea under the new Surface Force Training and Readiness Manual and the Afloat Bridge Resource Management Workshop with post-major command COs, mentors. Similar to what we have done with the Mariner Skills, we are taking a hard look at the facilities and training requirements for our tactical watchstanders. We already know that high-fidelity tactical simulators are central to the training and the proficiency required to win the future fight. The margins of victory against peer competitors will be thin but decisive. This margin comes from our teams being faster and more fully integrated than any adversary. This advantage will increasingly come from reps and sets and simulators. We built the Combined Integrated Air and Missile Defense and ASW trainers, or CATs, in San Diego and Norfolk, where watch teams of the specific Aegis baselines train with the exact system and tactical program with real-life environmentals, just as they would experience underway. As a matter of fact, they can't tell that they are not underway. Last week, the On-Demand Trainers, or ODTs, delivered pierside in San Diego and Norfolk. Watch teams can now continue tactical training during availabilities or combat system upgrades. Lastly, under the third and final line of effort, SMITIC is leading the Maritime Warfare Officer Tactical Training Working Group, or MWAT. This group is charged with determining the skills required for each tactical milestone in a surface warfare officer's career and how these skills will be trained to, develop, and assess so that we fully prepare officers and warfare commanders for tomorrow's fight today. We are creating a maritime warfare training continuum second to none. In thinking about who we are, what we are, and where we are going, it is helpful to think about where we've been and how this Navy and this surface force has always risen to the challenge. Think about the Barbary pirates, harassing our Mediterranean shipping and imprisoning our sailors in the earliest days of our republic. It was a new paradigm for our young nation, but we buckled down, and we owned that fight that day. Think about USS Constitution, one of the original 6 frigates, running down HMS Guerriere in August of 1812, the battle in which Constitution earned her nickname Old Ironsides. We weren't a big Navy then. We weren't a very powerful Navy then, but we were a Navy that owned that fight that day. Think about the dark days in World War II between Pearl Harbor, Midway, and Guadalcanal, when the Japanese Navy had us and our allies on the run in the Pacific. But we buckled down, and we owned that fight that day. Think about the Soviet Navy and Air Force looking to offset our naval superiority by threatening our surface forces with a variety of supersonic, high-diving, corkscrewing anti-ship missiles. And then think about Wayne E. Meyer and the Aegis program and how his single-minded focus on end-to-end systems engineering excellence helped us to own that fight that day. And finally, think about the battles yet to come against some very real opponents. When they come, we will own those fights. We will own those fights because today we are building the weapons, the sensors, the platforms, networks, and the sailors necessary to do so. We will own those fights because today we are moving to the offensive and arming ourselves with weapons we need to hold what our opponents value at risk and at extended range. We will own those fights because today our crews will have already fought them in the world's most sophisticated shoreside trainers. We will own those fights because today we are integrating the Navy with the Marine Corps. We will own those fights because today we are developing hypersonic weapons, electronic and directed energy weapons, in an integrated combat system underpinned by sophisticated battle management aids. We will own those fights because today we look, act, train, and operate as the world's premier surface force. And we will own those fights because today the people in this room, active duty and retired, uniform and civilian, military and industry, know that we can do no less, that the eyes of the heroes that built our proud legacy are upon us, and the hopes of the future generations are with us. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. Hold on for a second. Oh, I got caught. Best laid plan. All right, now we're getting down to work. I got 40 minutes, hopefully. What time is it? You do. I got, just about 40 minutes of Q&A, and this is the real power, I think, of SNA.
So we're going to take questions both from the mics that are distributed around the room and folks that are sending questions into to review, and that'll be displayed on the screen up here. So let's get somebody who wants to jump in there. ask the first question.
Go ahead, Ms. Megan.
Hi, good morning. Megan Eckstein with USNI News. You spoke about moving to naval integration beyond just cooperation and things the Navy had done previously. We've heard from the resource sponsors what that means on their end, but I wonder from the fleet perspective what naval integration looks like for you and your team.
So I think I described a little bit what integration looks like. So if you go back and just look at how we're doing it right now. We put together an amphibious task force, and who do you have in charge of that amphibious task force? You have a Commodore, who owns the 3 ships, and then you have a new commander, right? And so we are interoperating at that point. We're coordinating, right? We're prepping for the landing. We put the Marines ashore, right? And we're cooperating. That's not integration, okay? So integration is, I don't know, a big deck amphib, 13 F-35s who aren't there just to provide combat support to the Marines ashore, but are actually doing a lot of other different things. That's just one example of what integration looks like to me from the fleet perspective. Jim Kirby, Lieutenant General Eric Smith, we're working the deep, what does this really mean? What does General Berger mean? What does Admiral Gilday and Secretary Mobley mean? They're going after it. But from my perspective, I actually put that in there as an example to show potentially what integration looks like. Great, thanks. Is this not working? Okay. How about now? So everything I said to Megan was really insightful. Okay. All right? Better? Okay.
Okay, let me ask the first question. How is the surface fleet preparing to deal with future asymmetric threats, swarming quadcopters, cyber attack, hypersonic missiles?
That's a great question. And it's something that the Surface Force recognized that we didn't have the commands in place that were going to do that type of heavy thinking for us. So we established the Surface Development Squadron, and that's how we got Surf Deveron 1. If you look at what Surf Deveron 1, he's going to serve as the ISIC for the 3 Zumwalt-Class destroyers, but he is also going to be the ISIC and do manned training and equipping for the unmanned surface vessels. And you asked the question, man, train and equip for unmanned. Well, there's a manning aspect of unmanned to take care of those ships, make sure that they're ready to go forward, to operate the ships, to program the ships, or do whatever with the ships that are necessary. The question was about, hey, swarming tactics. What about, FAC, FIAC? You know who's really good at swarming tactics is LCS with the Hellfire and the longbow missiles. Probably the best anti-FIAC weapon that we've ever put to sea. So a lot of heavy thinking going into that, and we're really moving the ball down the field.
Another question that's come in. What role does the Zumwalt-Class have in the future Navy?
Well, so we changed the designation from Zumwalt from a land attack platform to the premier strike platform in the surface fleet. And I have got to tell you, I am thoroughly impressed with the capabilities what that destroyer is bringing to our fleet. And as a matter of fact, I'd love to have 6 more of them because the capabilities are that good. If you look at conventional prop strike, I can think of no other better platform than to put conventional prop strike on that platform. And then once that happens, or if that happens, make no mistake, we will put the fear of God into our adversaries once we marry those 2 platforms together.
Okay, we're not getting a lot of questions from the floor.
All right,
Please,
come on up from the floor.
Put the thing back up.
Yeah, put the thing back up. There you go.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
Anson Asma from USS Whidbey Island. My question is, with the amphibs, we have great sailors on board, GMs and FCs that actually are interested in their jobs. But we seem to spend most of our times in the yards, and then we actually get extended. We don't make it out of the yards on time.
Right.
What pipeline or what training programs do you have for those enlisted sailors and then officers as well to actually train and then be ready for the fight? Because what I've seen is apparently when we get ready to get out of the basic phase into the sustainment phase and all that, we kind of have this lack of skills from the sailors.
That's a great question. I'm going to flip it around on the other end, though. Why don't we concentrate on getting the ships out of the maintenance periods on time? That's exactly what we should have to do, and we're doing that. If you look at 2018, 29% of our ships came out of the availabilities on time. In 2019, 43% of our ships came out of their availabilities on time. We are projecting for 2020 that 71% of the ships will come out of the availabilities on time. That's a lot of huge effort by both industry and Navy leadership to change the paradigm of how we were doing ship maintenance. Now, for the training, you just described ready, relevant learning. And where we deliver the right training at the right time for the sailors, and we give them the training that they need to do for the job that they're getting ready to do. And then when they've got that job done, then we give them the training they need for the next job that we're going to do. In the officer world, if you remember, about a year and a half ago, we changed policy, and we do not assign ensigns to ships that are in long availabilities until they get to the ship about 3 months before it comes out of the availability, because we want our young officers to earn their OD qualifications on their ship, not on somebody else's ship, and do that while they're underway, and then learn the craft primarily while they're deployed. That is well in swing right now. You know, it took us about a year to transition that, so there were still some ensigns that probably went to a ship that was, 6 months before it came out of the availability. But right now, Purse 41 has it in place. He briefed it yesterday that we are able to get the officers to the ships no earlier than 3 months before coming out of the yard, so that they're plying their craft. Go ahead.
Sir, thinking for a moment about who's sitting in this room, let's talk about unmanned assets, MQ-25, MUSV. How can we maintain and operate those assets in a communications degraded environment? Well,
that's a great question. How do we control them? How do we see to them, right, in a communications denied environment? I don't know the answer to that right now. But you know who's gotten the charge to figure it out? Commodore Hank Adams, sitting right there. That's his job right now, to figure out how we're going to do all that stuff. But this is what I do know. Yeah. This is what I do know. When there is a fleet-on-fleet engagement in the future, medium displacement USVs and large displacement USVs are going to be part of that fight. I know that. It has to be. And quite honestly, I think that the United States Navy is the only Navy that could probably pull it off. That can design it, maintain it, train to it, employ it, and see to it. And it's going to be a game changer.
Here's a little bit different question. Many of our allies and partners are present. What is the Navy's message to them?
Well, I think the message is what I talked about in the speech, is that it's not just the United States Navy, it's the United States Navy and our allies and partners. We choose to go to the sea for all the reasons why I listed, but also we choose to control the sea, because if we don't, somebody else will. And when the United States Navy and our allies and partners leave, it creates a sucking vacuum. And it's going to be filled in by somebody. Where we value free trade, where we value the free access to the internet, and 99% of the internet is on cables that are underneath the ocean. Others may not. That's why we need to remain vigilant. That's why we need our Navy. That's why we need our partners in our allies' Navy.
Hi, Admiral Juan Garcia. We've met before. Great speech. Will you say a few words about how unmanned fits into the race to 355?
So the question has been asked in the last a couple of weeks, does unmanned count into the battle force numbers? I don't know the answer to that. And quite honestly, from my perspective, I don't really care. What I really care about is what the capabilities that unmanned brings to the fight. And the decisions we made at a much higher pay grade than I on whether or not we count unmanned as part of the battle force. But it also depends upon what that unmanned vessel looks like. For example, if it is just an adjunct weapons magazine, is that really a ship or is it an adjunct weapons magazine? But on the other hand, if it is an optionally unmanned or optionally manned surface vessel is somewhat large that has a command and control, combat systems, and weapons on board, perhaps then it could be counted. But right now, I don't think that we're going down that path. Right here.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Vincent Park from USS Whidbey Island. As the world is more like changing rapidly, what do you think the most difficult challenges that the junior officers like me will face in the fleet, sir?
The most difficult challenge that you will face in the fleet is that great power competition is back. You know, when I joined the Navy in 1985, we were deep into the Cold War. Deep into the Cold War. We were in great power competition. We did, our deployments looked something like this. Underway, battle group formations, 30 knots, full hard rudders, keeping the Krivaks and the Slavas and the Udaloys out of the inner screen as they were trying to get into the inner screen, always having a Soviet AGI attached to your battle group. Fire control radars being locked on. Every time you got underway from Japan, the backfire bombers coming out and flying on the battle group. Sounds a lot like the South China Sea, doesn't it? That's going to be your biggest challenge. To prepare your sailors, and when you're the captain, to prepare your officers and your chief's mess for the fight today that's going to happen tomorrow. That's your biggest challenge. That's why we're focusing on that.
With the former Secretary of the Navy, NORTHCOM, and EUCOM expressing desire for naval surface units capable of sustained operations in the high north, what are we doing to improve the capabilities, current and future?
Well, there is not just an insatiable desire for surface ships in the high north. I think that there's an insatiable desire for surface ships in every combatant commander's AOR. Why? We are the visible presence. We are the visible deterrence, right? You have to be forward deployed to deter. And if someone steps over the line, we will punish, but we will be able to do so immediately because we will be there. The capability that the DDGs are bringing to the fight in the high north, especially with the SQQ-89 Alpha Victor 15 with the MIFTA towed array, is phenomenal. It is phenomenal, and that's the reason why we built it. And it does exactly what we said it was going to do. Go ahead.
Sir, we have a conflict between policy and the requirements for integrating PEP officers and the desire for standardized computer systems. I'm wondering if there's any desire to standardize something like NS-WAN instead of SIPR so that we can pull up industry so that we can get our requirements to them, but integrate PEP officers more fully into our staffs.
Yeah. No. You know, it's a great question, but this is not IFOR's thing. We have to be able to talk with our allies. That is absolutely the case. We have to do that. We also, we don't talk to our allies about everything that we do, right? Nor do they talk to us about everything that they do. That's just reality. So to do that, we have to have our own secure communication net and email system and web browsing system that necessarily that our allies don't have access to. And they have their own too, that we don't have access to. I think that reality will probably be with us for a while.
Anyway, Commanding Officer, USS Whidbey Island. Now that we've had some runtime with the comprehensive review,
Right.
where do you think we're at specifically when you're talking about that first line of effort, maintaining
Yeah.
the force today, and where do you think we still need to make some progress?
So, you know, the second mass readiness review and the comprehensive review ended up with about 111 recommendations when you colluged them all together. And actually, some of the recommendations were in direct conflict of each other. I'll give you an example. The comprehensive review said stand up Commander Naval Surface Group Western Pacific, and the SecNav readiness review said do not stand up Commander Naval Surface Group Western Pacific. So because of those conflicts, we ended up with about 105, or 100 out of the 115, 118, we ended up with about 111 recommendations from those two studies. Only 47 of them are surface warfare specific that apply to surface warfare and driving ships and fighting ships. The rest of the balance, the 74 balance, were at the Echelon Echelon 2, operations, command and control, command design, all that other stuff. So where do we stand today after this effort? 105 out of the 111 have been implemented. 6 we chose not to implement. But when we say we, the Undersecretary of the Navy and the Vice Chief of the Naval Operations briefed the Secretary of the Navy and the CNO and said, we're not going to implement these recommendations. Like, for example, they said, establish the Lead TICOM under Fleet Forces Command and move everybody to Norfolk, right? We said we're not going to do that. It didn't really give us any bang for the buck. That was an example. Out of the 47 surface warfare initiatives, I will report in February to the February RROC that all 47 have been implemented. But that's not the end of the story, because there's a difference between implemented and complete. Right? And the mindset in the past when something bad happened was something bad happened. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to figure out what happened. We're going to put a checklist together, and then we're going to go down that checklist and we're going to go complete, 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 complete. And then at the end, we're going to write a new instruction and we're going to put more supervision over the process. And then what did we do? Went back to our day jobs. That hadn't been working for the 35 years that I've been in the Navy, because bad things still happen. Bad things can still happen. But this time, we changed the mindset. We said not only will we implement initiatives, we are going to then transition those initiatives to the requisite officer who has primary responsibility. Then we will track it, and then we, at a future date, will determine whether the end states and the outcomes that we desired were actually met. If that is then the case, we will call it complete. I have been advocating that the RROC remain in place for years to come. It is a focusing and barrier removal organization, second to none, that we've never established something like that before. Where there was a lot of angst about the RROC and providing oversight, and they're going to get into our stuff, the surface community actually embraced it and said, yes, more of it. I'll give you an example of how good the RROC is. In the normal day-to-day business last year, as we were doing one of the budget, there was a significant cut to contract services line. That was brought up to the vice chief, and he goes, yeah, this makes sense. We need to cut back on contractor services. So he signed it, right? Well, then we got it, and we went, whoa, you just cut 36 instructors out of CSCS and Dahlgren. You just cut 43 instructors in SWAS, and 17 of the new instructors that we just bought the manpower for or palmed for the Maritime Skills Training Centers, we can now not hire. So now you can imagine that. What would have happened under normal business in DC under OpNav? Well, I'll show that. We're going to talk about it at the POM President Budget 21 build and blah, 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 blah. We had it fixed that week because we had RROC, and I put it on the table, and they went, oh, no, change that back. That's the power of it. I'm very satisfied where we are. We're not calling mission complete, but I will tell you we're on a really, really solid path.
How do you see the Naval Reserve Surface Force being leveraged to support the vision of the surface force combat-ready ships
Battle-minded crews.
Battle-minded crews.
So right before we came here, was it Friday? Friday. All the surface warfare, TICOM, SURF-LANT, and SURF-PAC, COs, XOs, and CMCs had their training symposium in San Diego, and I spoke to them. And gone are the days when the reserves came into town and you locked all your drawers up, right? That's how it was. That's how Secretary Garcia, when he did his reserve time, when he was coming into the buildings, everybody would lock their drawers, right? Actually, I stole that line from him years ago. But that is actually a true statement. For example, ACU-1CO was sitting there with ACU-1's reserve CO, and they're like this. As a matter of fact, we can't do the ACU mission without the reserves. If we don't have the reserves, we don't have the requisite amount of manning to go do what we need to do to get the LCACs and all that other stuff out there. The BMUs cannot do their jobs. My deputy is a reserve officer, Joey Dodgen, is sitting right there, okay? So, he just doesn't show up on one weekend a month. It's like every other month. No, just he's always there, always communicating. If we go into the fight, some portion of my staff is probably going to go forward to do anything from logistics or perhaps battle damage assessment and repair, right? Guess who's going to fill in the seats behind us? It's the reserve staff that is led by Captain Maggie Dean, who's my reserve headquarters CO. So they are fully integrated into the fight. I talked about this last year, and I started pushing for this. Any former Aegis fire control technicians out in the audience, right? When you get out of the Navy, what happened? And you went to go into the reserves. It wasn't a billet for you. We wouldn't do it, and so we'd make you gunner's mates or bosun mates. Well, just because you got out of the Navy, you didn't forget that master's level of education we gave you as an Aegis fire controlman. So working with Luke McCullum, we got that changed. Now there are Aegis fire control billets in the reserve force. Why? Because if we go in the fight and we activate, guess where they're going? They're going right back to the DDG or the cruiser, to the baseline that they're certified in, because they were just as smart the day they get out of the Navy as the day that they join the Navy. Critical and integrated. That's integration. Dave. It is now.
Admiral, the combat-ready ships need fully manned crews with the right ratings and the right number of sailors. How are we doing in fit and fill? How's that trending?
Sure.
You guys have to take TICOM manning actions to fill urgent fills on ships. Are those trending up or down? Is this situation improving?
So it is, and but I will tell you this. I love telling the story. Shortly after I took over 2 years ago, I laid out some staff goals for SURF-PAC. As a matter of fact, for the first time, Roy Kitchen and I just signed out the first ComNav SURF 4 goals for our staffs to collectively work to the same direction. You've heard Admiral Grady, you've heard Admiral Aquilino say, one fight, one Navy. And Roy and I have taken that on. But 2 years ago, I made the staff goals that said, we're going to deploy our ships fully manned, fully certified, and CASREP free. That was our goals. As a matter of fact, someone, I don't know where, maybe it was my staff, but it was an unclassed document, created a fake Gmail account, took that document, circled it, said, new guy, lofty goals, pointed to CASREP free, said no way, and sent it to David Lauder at Defense News. David, are you in the audience? He doesn't want to tell that story, right? And I said, and so everybody comes running in my office. Oh my God, the world is ending, the sky is falling, they did this. And I said, that's awesome. David Lauder's going to write a story about what my staff goals are? Make it happen. So in April of last year, I called David up. So the the CASREP free was the BHAG. So you heard me talk about the moonshot. That was President Kennedy's BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal. Well, the CASREP free was the BHAG. out of those staff goals. And so I called David up and I described that to him. So in April of last year, I called him up and I said, hey, David, the Surface Force just landed on the moon. And he goes, what are you talking about? And I said, the Boxer ARG deployed CASREP free, the entire ARG. Now, we had deployed ships before that, CASREP free, or ships out the door with 1 or 2 CASREPs. So you go, well, why weren't we doing that before? Well, the world was different before. You know, in 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the mere fact that the United States Navy and our allies woke up in the morning, we controlled the sea, just because we woke up, right? So these were not bad decisions back then. So we decided, well, are we really going to spend the extra money? If you got 4 or 6 fire pumps up, are you really going to spend the extra money to fix those 2 fire pumps when you get underway? No, the answer back then was no. Today, combat-ready ships, we leave no redundancy on the pier because we are once again back in great power competition, just like we didn't leave redundancy on the pier back in the 80s. We didn't. Part of that was 9295. The goal was to deploy 9295. We have shifted that goalpost to the left. We shifted it to the left where we're going to get the ships to 9295 prior to Comp 2X, and we did it. So we shifted the goalposts to the left again. And that was to get the ships to 9295 prior to SWAT. So now ships go into the Surface Warfare Advanced Tactical Training, basic phase complete, at 9295. And we keep them there until the end of deployment. That doesn't come free. So my manning actions have tripled. But as Johnny Nowell has increased the accession mission, and as we're bringing in more sailors, right? There's difference between manning. I do manning. He does manpower, right? Manning is people, moving people around. Manpower is buying the billets, accessions, and all that other stuff. We are seeing a great effect on our ships. And I am projecting next year to do less, not in 20, but in 21 to do less manning actions to achieve the same effect that I'm achieving right now. But it doesn't come free. But just like combat-ready ships and no redundancy doesn't come free, my cannibalizations have tripled as well. But that's a good thing. Why? Because I'm sending the correct demand signal to NAVSUP and DLA to buy the right parts. So I think it's all goodness. And it's getting a lot easier. Thanks. Go ahead.
Admiral Steve Waddell, Rear Admiral, Royal Canadian Navy.
Admiral.
And I'm here to provide a bit of supporting fires to your comments about integration and some of the questions we've heard about integration and questions about PEPs. I'm here as proof to that, having come down from Canada as the Vice Commander at U.S. 2nd Fleet, working directly for Woody Lewis.
Very good.
And he, along with French, Norwegian, and British officers on the staff, are leading that effort in terms of integration in the staff. And I would argue that the way to achieve that further integration, to make sure that we're postured for fight tonight with allies and partners, is to have that integration in the staff and to consider and pursue a common information exchange and command and control architecture, not separate systems, but a means that is a baseline that we can all work with together. And rather than having enclaves that are national in nature, and then we release information as required to others, we find the common denominator that we all work on and then draw in when we need to, those areas when we need to go on the national.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I do think that we have to have a shared enclave. We do that under Centrix or Cohen's, but I still think that the host nations are going to also retain their own internal enclaves that they perhaps may not share information. But to your point, we cannot do the high North fight without all the countries that you just described. And we have to real-time be able to share real-time information on the same enclaves. We're looking at the same displays and all that other stuff. I agree with that.
And so just as a comeback, for those here who represent your other organizations and your other fleets, there are ways and means to integrate PEPs fully integrated into staffs. It's happening today, and I think that that's the way we should keep pursuing.
Absolutely. I concur.
What are you doing to fundamentally change the way we execute maintenance today to improve readiness? When will we see condition-based maintenance for the surface?
So that's two questions in one. The first one is, we stood up an initiative called P2P, Perform to Plan Surface. We narrowed the scope of that study to DDG 51 CNO availabilities. And we're figuring out what were the driver trees to preventing us from for two things, getting the work done on time and then getting all the work done. That effort, although focused on DDG1 CNO availabilities, every lesson learned that we have garnered from that initiative, we have applied to every type of ship class availability. That is what has allowed us to move the needle from 29% completion on time rate in 2018 to 43% completion on time in 2019 to a projected 71% in 2020. That's a huge movement of a needle in a very short period of time. We're continuing along with that effort, and it is bearing fruit. So the second thing is condition-based maintenance. We have an initiative underway in LCS. We have the contracts in place where the company's coming in, and instead of pulling the pump apart or the engine apart because a PMS card said to do it, why don't we do it when we know the thing's going to break? And the sophistication that has been developed over the last number of years, we've talked about this isn't a new idea, we've talked about this many, many years ago, but the sophistication and the computing power and the way that we monitor things and the things that we've learned have gotten to the point where it really is now predictive, where you can say, hey, look, I understand that mechanical seal is within tolerances right now, but it will fail 3.5 months into the deployment. So where is it more efficient and cost-effective to change the mechanical seal? Pierside, Norfolk, or on deployment in the 5th Fleet? And then if it fails when you're on deployment in the 5th Fleet, now you're taking away your redundancy just at the point when you need it. That's real condition-based maintenance. A lot of people think that CBM is going to reduce workload. It's not really about workload. It's about doing the maintenance at the right time for the right reasons. We're spearheading that initiative with LCS. We've got a couple of ships that we're installing systems in, but I foresee moving fast and bringing that to mainstream pretty quickly.
What are the top 2 to 3 emerging technologies that you believe will be instrumental in the future of U.S. Navy capabilities?
Directed energy weapons, right? And hypersonics. Unmanned. An integrated combat system on a fleet network that the Mach director screen looks exactly like the screen that's on the scope on an LCS. I think that those things, anything wrong there, Gene? Got it. Thanks. But that's where I see, I think those are the technologies. Go ahead, what do you got?
Good afternoon, Admiral. I'm Midshipman 4th Class Wilkins from the United States Naval Academy. Could you speak a little bit more on the cohesion and integration of not only the Marine Corps, but also the other U.S. branches of military and our foreign allies?
Right. Well, so as we further integrate with the Marine Corps, I think that that's a game changer. And, that's a sea change in thought. It's funny when General Berger sent out his first, indication, hey, this is what we're going to talk about. A lot of people went, oh, no, that must have been a mistake. He went, no, it's not. It's not. We are going to change the way that we think about how we employ the Navy and Marine Corps team. It's one team. I think that once that takes hold, then that's going to spill over into the other services. Because the future fight has to be an integrated fight. To really bring the fires in that you need when you need it at the right time. The commander, which is really the combatant commander, has to have the menu to choose from, and it's not just one service anymore. It's not just, well, I'm just going to choose the Air Force option. or I'm just going to choose the Navy option, because quite honestly, you pull the Navy option, you're going to have Air Force tanker support or Air Force runway support. You need the Army to do or the soft forces. It's amazing. I think that that's where integration is going to go to. It's going to be the next level to joint operations, where probably the word integrated really kind of replaces the word joint. That was a great question.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, Admiral, or good afternoon, whatever time it is. Former Marine veteran, served on the Bonnie Dick and the Essex. And
Very
so
good.
back to kind of that question, Marine Corps Times talks about we're going to update doctrine and policy to reflect that integration.
Sure.
But for me, the biggest problem is time on ship, time with sailors, so that we're not only integrated, but we're a family.
Right.
It goes beyond that. Are there any plans in the works to create a more integrated training curriculum so that sailors and Marines are working together, not just at shore, but also at sea?
Yeah, there's been baby steps. There's a amphibious warfare officers course down in Quantico that gets rave reviews. That's only been in place for a couple of years, 3 years. I was DCMP, I was in Millington when we kind of stood that up, and there was the push to get the right officers to that course at the right time. But there necessarily is going to have to be that integration and training. Why? Because it's not just about Marines on ships, and you got to think about Marines. You go Marines on ships. You go LPD, LSD, LHA/LHD, right? How about Marines on LCS? Right? When you bring a Marine Corps officer down to an LCS and they walk into the mission bay, they go bing, 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 bing. You bring a soft leader, Special Operating Forces, down to an LCS, and you bring them into the mission bay, you can see the light bulbs going off. We don't even know what we don't know yet as far as what kind of integration we're going to do just with that. What about the integration of the Marine Corps ASOF with ESBs? We don't know yet. But when we do, because we're figuring all that with Jim Kilby, I saw Jim Kilby, he's figuring all that out right now. He's the 300-pound brain in the room. And he's figuring all that out right now. But when we do that, part of that's got to be, what is the integrated training plan? Because what you don't want to do is go, okay, here's the integrated plan, this is how, Marine Corps, you go train, and Navy, you go train, and then we'll meet up in the middle somewhere.
Awesome. Thank you, Admiral.
Put that on your list.
Okay. What do you consider the greatest impediment beyond budget to achieving desired level of fleet and sailor readiness?
Continuing resolutions kill us. So our inability to pass a budget, I think, is probably the biggest threat to our ability to consistently to do the things that we need to do to get the right material, the right training, the right engineering, and all that stuff in place. So we take that hurts us. That hurts us a lot. So I think that we would like to. I got to tell you what, we got that 2-year budget deal. It was awesome for the Navy. Not just for the Navy, for the entire country. It was awesome. But that hurts us. Johnny Nowell and I and Vice Chief, when he was CMP, lived through 10 continuing resolutions in 2016. Remember that? And we were making determinations: do we pay people or do we continue to do PCS transfers? So we made the rightful decision to continue to pay people. That's not good for readiness. I think that is the thing that really detracts from readiness. But then on all the other things, all the new initiatives that we want to do. I'll give you an example. So one of the things that came out of the CR and the SRR, and really kind of everybody said this is the right way to go, is the development of the Maritime Skills Training Centers. When we went into the continuing resolutions earlier in this year, we put at risk our ability to execute those where we laid it out that we were executed, because it was MILCON. And it was a new contract start, and you can't do that stuff if you're under a CR. So I still view that as probably the thing that's the most detrimental.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, if there's anybody in the audience.
Okay, we can do a web one if you want.
We'll do that. What kind of framework is necessary to encourage in-house technological development in order to reduce dependency in the private sector?
Well,
he asked for that question.
Yeah. Can I do a redo? No. Answer that question. I don't want. We can't. I don't want to divorce ourselves from industry. All the good ideas come out from industry. This is, you talk about integrated operations. This is what we need to do. We need this integrated operations. We need industry to do what industry does the best, and we need the Navy to do what the Navy does the best. And we need to operate and go in the same direction, informed. And that's why we kind of do things like this. That's why we have industry days. That's why we put out requests for proposals or CPDs and all that other work that happens from our acquisition folks, our program managers, our resource sponsors. All that work, produces combat-ready ships and battle-minded crews. But more importantly, it produces things like Zumwalt-Class destroyers and Aegis destroyers and Aegis cruisers and F-35s and F-18s and F-18s ENFs. That's how we get there. I think that if the Navy just tried to sit around and think of all the cool stuff by themselves, we get a 30% solution. We need to bring the entire team in together.
I think that's a perfect answer. Thank you. Okay, final question. What keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night? What's that? It's a great question. So I live at the end of the runway at NASNY. It's the frickin' helicopters. Because I go to bed at 8 o'clock at night, and they don't stop flying until like 11. I implicitly trust my commanding officers, and I know that they're staying awake at night to do what they need to do that.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
It's terrific.